My sister tried to steal my house. Imagine waking up one day, your house is gone, and your sister is behind it. Listen to my story and tell me if what I did to reclaim my house was worth it. The manila envelope felt heavier than it looked. I had been sitting at my kitchen table, a stack of invoices on one side and a mug gone cold on the other, when I saw my sister's name printed on the return label. My hands shook as I tore it open. Inside were photocopies of documents and a certified filing notice. She had submitted papers to challenge the title of my house. I read the lines over and over until the words blurred. My throat closed and I felt hot and cold at once. How could she do this? We had grown up in the same small town, our childhood stitched between shared rooms and secret jokes. She was supposed to be my ally. I thought of the nights I had patched leaks myself, the weekends I had spent stripping wallpaper and repainting rooms so the mortgage age would stay manageable. All of it felt suddenly fragile, like a paper tower someone could knock down. I pressed the papers to my chest as if they were the thing that could steady me. My name is Julia Kane, I told the empty kitchen, as if saying it mad yet real. Then I made a slow, certain decision. I would not let her take what I had built. At first I moved like someone in a fog. I went through motions at work with a practiced smile and curt emails, but my mind was elsewhere. Between meetings and deadlines, I read the packet again and again, trying to find some mistake, some clerical error. It would mean this was a prank. It wasn't. Her signature was neat and confident, the filings had been made the week before. I remembered the way she had always smiled just a little too wide when money was mentioned, how she'd suggested I consolidate my accounts, offered to help when I was short. I had laughed it off then. I realized how much I had let our past blind me. That night I started an inventory. Each unpaid bill, every favor I had done to keep the house afloat, the calls I had made to landlords and repairmen. I wrote it all down until the list looked like a map of my life. When I finally let myself cry, it was quiet and steady, like rain that had been held back for too long. But beneath the ache, a new sound started, a tiny, steady resolve. I'll figure this out, piece by piece. I called Mara, my friend from law school who now worked at a small firm downtown. I had not said a word about the envelope to anyone else. She listened, then said, "Send it to me. Don't move anything. Let me look." Her calm voice felt like a lifeline. I emailed her scans before my hands stopped shaking and waited, counting the minutes as if they were steps. At lunch I sat in my car and breathed until it didn't hurt. When Mara called back, she was blunt. There were enough irregularities to challenge the filling, but whoever had helped my sister had tried to make it clean. "We can stop the transfer, Julia," she said, "but we have to be surgical." I knew then that anger alone wouldn't be enough. I needed strategy. After work I sat under the lamp in my living room with the documents spread around me like evidence in a case. Names, dates, signatures, every tiny detail could matter. I began to circle things, to write notes. My house had been my sanctuary and my burden. Now it was a battleground. I straightened my shoulders and started to plan. At the office I wore a suit and a practiced expression. I had deadlines that week that mattered, clients who expected me to be precise. I let my work be my armor. When emails pinged, I answered with the same steady professionalism I always used. People who didn't know what I was facing couldn't see the storm. Only my closest colleague, Darren, who shared the cube wall with me, noticed the way my hand hovered a little too long over my mug. He sent a text, "You okay?" I didn't reply right away because I was drafting a message to my sister, a message I never sent. Instead I asked Mara questions. What jurisdictional motions, which filings, which witnesses? She gave me a list and I memorized it like prayers. At lunch I watched families in the plaza with quiet envy. Normalcy felt like an island I'd lost. That afternoon I found myself checking the public records online, tracing my property's history. There, between the scanned deeds from decades ago, I saw a tiny, nearly invisible clause. It didn't solve everything, but it was a thread, and threads could be woven into a rope if pulled correctly. I wrote its reference down, feeling a spark of hope. That evening I heard my sister's laugh through the paper-thin wall. She had always been loud, the kind of person whose volume filled rooms and masked unease. I could make out Words, planning, closing, won't she be surprised, and it pinned me like glass. I recorded the murmur discreetly on my phone, not sure whether it would be admissible later, but sure I needed proof. She came by later pretending to be casual, dropping off a casserole and a smile. I just wanted to check in, she said, chin up, voice honeyed. Her eyes flicked toward the envelope on my table and she said the thing that made me want to laugh and cry at once. I'm just trying to help, Jules. I set the casserole down and forced a smile. I invited her to sit. The conversation was polite on the surface. She asked about work, the neighborhood, neighbors' gossip. Underneath, I caught the faint curl of contempt when I mentioned the mortgage. She made a joke about creative solutions, and I let it pass, studying her face like a map. I didn't confront her that night. Instead, I spent hours with Mara and Darren, walking through the sequence of possibilities. Darren, who had an eye for details, suggested tracing phone records, social contacts, and recent financial transfers. Mara warned me about making any public accusations too early. She wanted to build an airtight case. I felt like a detective in a book, but the stakes were not fictional. I imagined her smug face if I made a mistake. For a few days I let her think I didn't know. She called twice a day with updates, trying to sound helpful, and I answered in measured, bored tones. At work I played the part of efficiency itself, but on breaks I pulled up the recorded clip to hear her voice again, listening for slips. Each time she said so mething careless, an admission, a laugh that revealed intent, I saved it. I also started to reach out to a few family members independently, asking neutral questions about recent conversations and mentioning nothing of my suspicion. I watched their reactions, logged them, and tucked each subtle shift into my plan. A cousin named Ellen had always been a little too comfortable taking sides. I invited her for coffee under the pretense of catching up. Over lattes I mentioned casually that I had noticed odd paperwork around the house and wondered if it was normal for siblings to file such things without talking. Ellen shifted, fiddling with her napkin. I thought she told you, she said, eyes wide. That gave me a doorway. I kept my tone light and asked open questions. She admitted she'd gotten a call from my sister Saji Sting that I was behind on payments, that maybe it was time someone with more stability took the property. I made a face, the right mix of wounded and puzzled, and Ellen offered an apology and then argued that she hadn't known the details. That was a nah for now. Getting family to pause, even for a breath, was vital. Each pause meant my sister's narrative had cracks. I left the cafe feeling a small bubble of triumph. Influence is brittle if pressure is applied correctly. Next I found the clause in the deed that Mara had hinted about. It was an old stipulation about continuous occupancy and original purchaser rights. On its face it was archaic, but it applied to me. I photocopied it, highlighted the relevant lines, and met Mara at a small law library downtown to run through strategy. She smiled for the first time since we'd started this. This is exactly the kind of thing that can stop a transfer cold, she said, tapping the page. The thrill began to replace my fear. We draw FTED a motion to halt any transfers immediately and prepared a timeline of evidence we would present, the recording, correspondence, witness statements. Mara warned me again about spectacle. This had to be surgical. When you hit, she said, it should be weight, not noise. I liked the metaphor. I wanted her reckoning to be precise, undeniable. I thought about the nights I'd spent scraping paint and learning to patch a roof, the pride of maintaining a home. This was my last and best renovation, restoring truth. I sent an email to my sister, neutral and crisp, noting a clerical question about her filing and asking for clarification. She answered almost immediately with a defensiveness that was thinly veiled. I forwarded her response to Mara and asked her to draft a formal letter demanding withdrawal. Meanwhile I kept weaving my quieter strategy. Friends who had been quiet observers were now being nudged with information. Little by little, people who had accepted my sister's smiles were beginning to read between les. At my job, I had a win. A project I managed got praise from partners, and it felt like a reclamation of competence. Work reminded me I was more than the domestic versions of myself my sister propagated. In the evenings I would print and reprint documents, arranging them like a storyboard, then stack them in a box. It was strange how a cardboard box full of photocopies could feel like a talisman. I slept better knowing everything had a place. The first hearing date arrived fast. Mara filed the emergency injunction and I sat in the courthouse gallery with my hands clenched. My sister's lawyer was composed and practiced. She looked at me as if I were a minor inconvenience. But the judge read our motion and paused at the clause in the deed, tapping his pen slowly. I watched my sister's face, an expression that went from confident to thinly startled. The judge issued a temporary restraining order preventing any transfer until the full hearing. I felt the air leave me and come back in a rush. Outside the courthouse, reporters were not yet interested and the family hadn't been rallied. It was still small and legal and quiet. Mara hugged me briefly, saying, "We put the brakes on." For the first time in weeks, I let relief flood me. But relief was small. This was a pause, not the end. I knew she would not stop. She would try something else. I needed to be ready. Back home, I found a voicemail from my sister that made my skin crawl. She sounded outraged and hollow, like someone whose plan had not been imagined to fail. I saved the file. My instinct was to reply in an accusing voice, to let all the anger out, but Mara advised calm. "Let the record handle it," she said. I agreed, and for that week I focused on solidifying testimony. The old family friend who'd tipped me off agreed to write a statement, and Ellen agreed to talk to Mara privately. My sister's frantic energy leaked in other, smaller ways. Texts that wound between flattery and accusation, calls to a property manager asking leading questions. I counted them. Each one would be a stitch in the fabric we would present. At work I began to talk carefully about boundaries in meetings, about professional responsibility and ethics, because I wanted colleagues to see me as the steady person I was. It felt like a long chess game, but I liked chess. It rewarded patience. Then something small and unexpected happened that shifted everything. I found an old journal in a box of my mother's things, handwritten notes about family decisions and future plans. In the margin of one entry was a line about the house, and who it was intended to protect. It referenced a trust set up to ensure the property remained with the descendant who kept it as a home. My chest tightened. The journal wasn't a legal document, but it painted intent. Mara said it could help show the judge the spirit behind the deed's clause. I copied the pages and had them notarized as part of our exhibits. The discovery felt almost cinematic, a quiet voice from the past bolstering me when I needed it most. I mailed a copy of the key page to 2 relatives who had been on the fence, along with a note asking them to consider the family legacy. Some replied with brief, supportive messages, others asked to talk. Momentum was building. My sister's attacks became more erratic. She called the property manager and tried to produce letters that undercut my continuous occupancy claim. When Mara and I reviewed them, they were suspiciously convenient, typed copies without originals. I sent a poll ite, firm request for originals and due dates by registered mail. Her responses wobbled, and in the gaps of her replies I felt the shape of desperation. At the same time, I doubled down at work, taking on a leadership role in a cross-team initiative. The pressure at the office was relentless, but it grounded me. Success at work felt like a mirror of the progress in my case. Where she tried to take away, I rebuilt. I began to sleep less and think more, but the fatigue was good, part of the labor of reclaiming my life. Friends rallied, small gestures, dinners, messages that reminded me I was not alone. It mattered in a human way I had underestimated. A holiday family gathering felt like walking into the eye of a storm. My sister arrived with her typical self-assurance and a dress that said she had somewhere important to be. She hugged me a little too long and asked perfunctory questions about repairs and mortgage. I answered in measured tones, planting a few well-chosen facts about timelines and documents. As relatives milled and laughed, I watched them watch my sister. I could feel their uncertainty spreading, subtle as a shadow at dusk. It was satisfying in a quiet way. People were no longer taking her word as gospel. My sister tried a cruel joke about keeping house, and several people didn't laugh. The silence was louder than any argument. After dessert, I walked outside for air and felt the night sea leer my head. The house felt like mine in a way it hadn't when I'd first moved in, like a place anchored by truth rather than assumption. The legal discovery process revealed more than I expected. Mara found bank transfers that suggested my sister had funneled small payments toward preparatory fees for the filing. They were clumsy, disguised through intermediaries, but traceable. I sat at my kitchen table with spreadsheets and transfer dates, feeling the pattern emerge like a map. The evidence made the story darker than I had imagined. This was not a spur-of-the-moment attempt, it was planned and resourced. I felt anger and a cold clarity representative lacing it. We drafted an affidavit, compiled witness statements, and arranged for the property manager to testify about my continuous occupancy and maintenance efforts. I also decided to prepare a personal statement for the judge, not as a plea but as a clear account of the life I'd built in the house. Writing it felt like naming the stakes. All the small, ordinary things that made the H-house a home, paint, laughter, bills paid on time, were worth fighting for. My sister sensed we were closing in. She sent a lawyer's letter accusing me of harassment for contacting family members and insisting I drop the claims. I printed the letter and placed it on the stack of documents like a taunt. Mara replied with legal calm, pointing out the flimsy foundation of those accusations. "She's panicking," Mara said, "and panicked people make mistakes." I watched closely. The mistake came in an email she accidentally CC'd to someone outside the immediate scheme. It contained a PHRACE that echoed the recorded conversation I had months earlier. "Once the deed flips, it's done." That line, when presented in court, would be damning. I flagged it and added it to the exhibits. The pieces fit together now with a weighty logic. The recording, the transfers, the emails, the notations in the journal. When I slept, I dreamed of stack after stack of papers dropping into a neat pile, orderly and irrefutable. The dream felt close to waking truth. The day of the full hearing was tense. The courtroom smelled of polished wood and old coats. My sister sat with an air of defiance, mouth tight. Her lawyer tried to be theatrical. Mara presented our case with the slow, careful logic of someone who had rehearsed truth into lines. We submitted the bank trails, the property manager's sworn statement, the journal excerpt, and the recording I had made of my sister's offhand plan. The judge read through, and at one point looked directly at my sister and asked a question no one expected. Where were the original documents proving continuous payments? My sister stammered. The judge's look was not cruel, it was measured, the look of someone weighing heavy facts. At the end, the judge denied her claim and admonished HR legal counsel for sloppiness. The ruling did not erase the weeks of anxiety, but it put a clear legal seal on my ownership. Relief swelled like a tide. People in the gallery who had been polite now approached me with small congratulations. I felt both vindicated and exhausted. But the story didn't end when the judge ruled. After the hearing, I learned my sister had reached out to a local builder and tried to auction off some old fixtures she claimed as hers from the house. The audacity left me numb for a moment. She was trying new angles, thinking faster than we could refute. Mara advised swift action, cease and desist, immediate recovery. We sent letters, and the builder backed away. The family felt the edges fraying more than before. Some relatives refused to be drawn in further. My sister's desperation showed in texts that slipped into bitterness and later into apologetic pleas when she thought no one would see. I watched the transformation with a strange mix of pity and firm resolve. I had not wanted to break her, I wanted to stop her. Her attempts to skirt the law showed she was willing to risk more than I had imagined. Each step she took further away from reason tightened the net around her. There was a private moment I'll not forget. She came to my door at night, face raw, coat askew, and said she had made a mistake. She expected forgiveness, a hand on the shoulder, a quiet reunion. Instead, I offered a firm cup of tea and an honest conversation. I laid out what she had done and how it had hurt me, detail by detail, without yelling. She cried, but some tears felt performative. I told her the judge's decision, watched the change in her expression, and then asked the question that mattered: why? Her answer was a tangle of envy, old grievances, and a belief that I had always been lucky. She spoke of being overlooked at work, of feeling second best. Listening to this did not erase the betrayal, but it made me human to her again in a way I hadn't expected. I could see the person behind the plan, wounded, small, and reckless. I told her I would not press charges if she withdrew all filings and agreed to mediation, and more importantly, if she sought help to understand the root of what had driven her. She nodded, fingers tight around the cup. It was a fragile truce, but legal silence alone would not repair what had been shattered. The mediation meetings were oddly intimate and formal at once. We sat in a neutral room with a mediator who spoke gently and asked us to recount the story in turns. I told the truth plainly and without flourish. The late nights repairing the roof, the garden beds I'd planted, the calls to save the house during a leak. She spoke of longing and unearned self-pity, of moments where she had compared herself to me and chosen shortcuts. The mediator asked us to propose ways forward. I proposed acknowledgement, a formal apology, and restitution for the costs she had incurred in a way that respected the court's decision. She proposed a small payment plan and voluntary counseling. I felt my guard relax in stages. It wasn't forgiveness in a sweeping sense, but a start. The mediator suggested follow-ups and a family meeting under a counselor's guidance. I left with a sense of cautious hope. That truth had been aired and that repair, slow and deliberate, might be possible. At work, my reputation had shifted subtly. People who had only known me as competent began to see the quiet force behind my persistence. Darren joked that I had become courtroom famous, and that rivals would be wise to watch that calm. I felt proud, not because of the attention, but because I had taken ugly things and turned them into something constructive. I was more deliberate in meetings, more open with colleagues about needing space sometimes. The house itself seemed to thaw. During weekends I would open windows and let air in, repaint a wall or plant a new bush. Friends dropped by, bringing casseroles and laughter. The mediator's follow-up showed my sister was attending counseling and had formally withdrawn her filings and provided a written apology. It didn't erase weeks of pain, but it acknowledged responsibility. I accepted the apology with a quiet ceremony in my heart. A bowl of soup, a nod, and then a boundary. I felt my center return. But life is rarely linear. A distant relative surprised everyone by revealing he had heard my sister boast that she had made a mistake on purpose to see what she could get away with. It was a breathless claim and dangerous if true. Mara advised caution. Rumor was not evidence, but the whisper spread like a stain. I chose not to let gossip dictate my actions. Instead, I concentrated on tangible things. Bills paid, a new gutter installed, and a meeting with a financial advisor to shore up my estate planning. I updated my deed, added clearer language to prevent future challenges, and drafted a letter to family summarizing the steps taken and the court's ruling. I wanted the facts to be the record, not whispered stories. It felt like building a fence stronger than the one that had kept me insecure. The week I implemented these protections, I slept with fewer interruptions. The tangible work soothed the emotional rawness. One bright morning, the family gathered at my house for a brunch with a counselor present. The air was taut but kinder than months before. My sister and I sat across from each other with coffee and cautious smiles. The counselor guided us through exercises that were simple but profound, speaking in turns, acknowledging hurts, admitting real desires beyond envy. My sister apologized again, this time without flourish, naming specific actions and promising a plan of restitution that included financial responsibility, therapy, and volunteering in community housing projects. I felt tears rise, not the hot anger of early weeks but a quiet, weary relief. Her words didn't undo the past, but they cracked a space where something like trust might be seated again. Family members nodded, some still skeptical, some relieved. When the brunch ended, we hugged with the odd mixture of distance and new gentleness that comes with fragile reconciliation. After months of paper trails, mediation, counseling, and small acts of repair, life settled into a rhythm. My sister had a job change that suited her better, and she seemed less frantic. She began to volunteer at the community center I had once helped, and I saw her there planting flowers, awkward and focused. Our interactions were careful. We still had hard conversations, but the impulsive cruelty receded. I kept the house and had finally finished painting the front porch the color it should have always been. I set a dinner for friends to celebrate a new summer and felt comfortable inviting family with safe boundaries. The experience altered me. I had found reserves of patience, learned legal strategy, and discovered that standing up for my life did not make me unkind. If anything, it taught me the edge of compassion and the importance of boundaries. Months later, I sat at my kitchen table again with a cup of tea, the same table where the manila envelope had landed. Only now, the envelope felt like a relic of a battle survived. I kept one copy of the court order and a small folder of documents in a drawer as proof that truth had prevailed. My sister and I spoke more often, sometimes about nothing important, recipes, a new neighbor, work stories. The wound remained, a pale line that would likely never vanish entirely, but it no longer defined the house or me. I had learned to protect the physical space and the emotional life that filled it. I had made sure she regretted attempting to take it, not by revenge in the cruel sense, but by holding firm to truth, pursuing justice with integrity, and requiring accountability. That clarity had been the real victory, preserving a home, restoring dignity, and teaching the people I loved that boundaries could be firm and humane. My life, built of midweek repairs and quiet Sunday mornings, was again mine, and that felt like the kind of justice that lasts.